She'd spent 7 years stitching memory into fabric. It took 8 minutes to destroy it. Sienna Nicole was 28 years old, black, beautiful, a seamstress whose name had begun to move through the city's wealthiest households the way certain names do, quietly, on the strength of the work alone. By day, she carried plates at a white tablecloth restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. By night, she turned fabric into something that lasted. Wedding alterations, bespoke commissions, textile art that collectors paid well to own. But there was one piece she had never sold and never planned to. A quilt, 7 years of construction, scraps of her mother's Sunday dress, remnants from clients who never knew they had left something behind, every square a record of a year she had survived. She brought it to the Hahn estate in Alpine, New Jersey,
as a technique reference. Never meant to leave her hands.
Minjai Hahn didn't introduce himself when he walked into a room. He didn't need to. The man they called the Ledger, one of the most feared figures in the Korean-American criminal network on the eastern seaboard, stood near the fireplace with his charcoal suit and his serpent tattoo, and his silence, and the room organized itself around him. His son was getting married. The exhibition was his family's event. He was there to observe. What nobody planned for was Yuna Park, the bride. The woman who watched a black seamstress receive more admiration in one morning than she had received all year, who disappeared for 8 minutes, who came back with a bottle of bleach from the laundry room, who tipped it across the quilt and called it an accident. The violet stain spread across 7 years of hand-stitched memory, and the most dangerous man in the room set down his glass and crossed the floor. What he saw when he crouched beside that stain, what nobody else in that room could have possibly recognized, changed everything that happened next. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The bread basket came back empty for the 3rd time. Sienna Nicole picked it up from the foretop without making eye contact with the woman who handed it to her. A correction, not a courtesy, and walked back to the service station at Aveline's east wall, refilled it from the warmer, and set it down again, the woman said. Finally, to the woman across from her, Sienna asked if they were ready to order. They were not. She had been on the floor since 10. The Saturday lunch rush ran heavy, the private dining room full, the bar carrying a market menu nobody on the floor had been properly briefed on, and the kitchen behind on the sea bass because someone had called out. Sienna managed 3 tables without a notepad. She had done this for 4 years. She still could not afford to do only the other thing. That evening, in her apartment on Fenimore Street in Crown Heights, she spread the quilt out flat across the bed and checked the stitching along the east edge. She did this every few months, not for repair. She never repaired it, but to account for it. Each square its own territory. The pale rose pink one in the lower left quadrant, cut from her mother's Sunday church dress. A navy blue square from an overcoat belonging to a woman in Bay Ridge, whose daughter had commissioned a wedding vest and left behind a remnant without asking for it back. A small square of gold silk from the lining of a coat Sienna had bought at a consignment sale in 2019 and never worn because the shoulders were wrong. She had been building this quilt since she was 21. She didn't know she was building it. She thought she was managing scraps. The rose-pink square was beginning to thin at one corner. She traced the edge with a fingernail. She did not repair it. She folded the quilt back into its linen cloth and tied it with the cotton twine she kept in the top drawer. Then she sat on the edge of the bed. She ate rice with a fried egg standing over the kitchen counter because she didn't want to use a bowl. The call came on a Wednesday. Hahn Cultural Ventures. An event coordinator named Priya Nair, speaking quickly and pleasantly, explained that the estate was hosting a charitable luncheon tied to an upcoming wedding reception in the Han family. There would be a curated textile exhibition. Curator Constance Reeves. Sienna knew the name, had recommended her work after seeing it at a gallery show in Dumbo 3 months ago. Would Ms. Nicole consider bringing 2 or 3 pieces for consideration? Sienna said she had a commissioned vest that would be finished by Friday. Priya Nair said, "Wonderful, and that a car could be arranged for Saturday morning." Sienna said she would take the train. She brought 2 pieces, the vest completed and wrapped in tissue, and the quilt. In its linen cloth, the cotton twine tied in a double knot. Because Constance Reeves had specifically asked in a follow-up email to see a sample of her handwork for technique reference. Sienna had written back 1 sentence. "The quilt is not for sale." She sent it without elaborating. The Han estate in Alpine, New Jersey, sat behind a gate that the driver at the road entrance didn't comment on. The house was the kind of house that didn't announce itself. Someone met Sienna at the side entrance, not the main door, and led her through a corridor that smelled of fresh flowers and something older underneath, cedar or stone or old money in the walls. She carried the linen-wrapped quilt against her chest, both arms around it, the way you carry something breakable when there is no box for it. The exhibition space was a long room with high ceilings and 2 walls of windows looking out over a formal garden. Other textile pieces were already staged on display frames. Sienna recognized the work of 2 makers she had followed online for years. She set the quilt down on the velvet-topped table Priya Nair indicated and began, carefully, to untie the twine. She heard someone pause behind her. She finished untying the knot first. Then she looked up. Constance Reeves crouched slightly to look at the quilt without touching it. This was a thing Sienna had noticed about the good ones. They looked before they reached. Constance studied the lower left quadrant for a long time. Then she said, "This isn't decorative." She said it the way a doctor states a diagnosis, not the way someone says a compliment. Daniel Han came in from the terrace at 11:30, still in his jacket from an earlier meeting, and made his way through the exhibition room, making the right noises about the right pieces. He stopped at the quilt. He pushed his glasses up with 1 knuckle and said,
"This is the most honest thing in this room."
"It's not for sale," Sienna said. He nodded. "I know. Priya told me." He looked at it another moment. "Where do you work?" she told him. He looked up at her with the mild, uncorrected surprise of someone who didn't know how to reattach that information to the room they were standing in. Una Park had been in the room for 20 minutes. She had not looked at the quilt. She had looked at Daniel looking at the quilt, and at Constance Reeves crouching in front of it, and at the 2 estate guests who had stopped their own conversation to come closer. She spoke briefly to someone near the terrace doors, a social exchange, nothing unusual, and then excused herself. She came back 8 minutes later. Sienna was talking to Constance about the stitching technique on the navy blue square. She didn't see Una cross to the refreshment table. She didn't see her pick up the bottle she'd carried back from the laundry corridor. She heard the sound first, a hollow glug, a splash, and then she smelled it. Sharp and chemical. Cleaning fluid. She turned. The stain moved slowly at first, and then faster, spreading from the center of the quilt outward in a widening violet-purple radius, the bleach soaking through the cotton batting, into the stitching, into the squares. The rose-pink square disappeared first. It was closest to where the liquid had landed, and then the gold silk, and then the edges of the navy. "Oh," Una said. Her hand was still holding the empty bottle. "I'm so sorry. I was reaching for water and I didn't see it." The room was quiet. Sienna looked at the quilt. 3 full seconds without moving. Then she put her hands flat at her sides. Min-jae Han had been standing near the fireplace for most of the morning. He had not spoken to anyone except to decline a coffee refill with a small movement of his hand. He was the kind of man who occupied a room the way a weight occupies water, displacing everything around him by existing. He set down his glass and crossed the room in 15 steps. He did not crouch the way Constance had. He went down on one knee. He reached out with 2 fingers and lifted the lower right corner of the quilt, carefully, away from the pooling liquid. He stopped moving. What he was looking at, what no one else was looking at, because everyone else was looking at Yuna, or at the stain, or at Seamstress's face, was a pale cream square in the lower right quadrant, partially protected by the fold of the linen cloth still beneath the quilt's edge. The bleach had reached it, but not consumed it, through the faint violet tinge still visible. A border of hand-sewn gold thread embroidery, a repeating pattern, small and exact, the kind of needlework that took months. He knew that pattern. He had watched it being made, in the evenings, on the couch of a house in Fort Lee, New Jersey, by a woman in her 40s who embroidered while she watched old Korean films and didn't look at her hands because she didn't need to. Min-jae Han stood up slowly. He looked across the room at Sienna Nicole, who was still standing with her hands flat at her sides, looking at nothing. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Yuna spoke to Priya Nair in a tone that wasn't loud enough to be a scene, but carried enough that Sienna heard every word. The quilt was damaged. It was a liability for the exhibition. It would reflect poorly on the estate to display a piece in that condition, and Yuna was sure Miss Nicole would understand. It wasn't personal. It was simply not appropriate anymore. Priya looked at Sienna. Sienna looked at Priya. Something was decided in that 3-second pause that nobody said out loud. Daniel Han was by the window. He had his phone in his hand, and he was looking at it the way people look at phones, when they have decided not to look at anything else. Graham Walsh, the estate's senior event coordinator, tall, British, accustomed to managing situations by removing them, came forward and picked up the linen cloth from beneath the quilt. "I'll get this to the service entrance," he said. "No." Sienna's voice was level, not raised. "Don't touch it." Graham Walsh looked at her the way he looked at complications. "I would like it moved to the exhibition hall," Sienna said, carefully, both hands underneath. He looked at Yuna. Her expression didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. He looked at Daniel Han. Daniel Han looked at his phone. Min-jae Han said, from across the room, without raising his voice and without looking up, "Carry it to the hall." Graham Walsh carried it to the hall. The luncheon was the following day. That afternoon, Sienna was given a small room adjacent to the exhibition space to prepare her pieces. She brought the quilt in herself, both arms underneath, and set it on the work table. She stood over it. The full damage was worse than it had looked in the main room. The bleach had moved further overnight. Not actively, but the oxidation had continued through the batting, pulling color from squares she thought were protected. The navy had gone gray at the edges. The gold silk had crinkled where the chemical hit the weave. And the rose-pink square, cut carefully from the hem of her mother's Sunday church dress in 2018, because the dress no longer fit anyone, and the fabric was too important to leave folded in a bag in the back of a closet. The rose-pink square had dissolved from its color entirely. What was left was a raw yellowed edge, where the dye had been stripped and the cotton had begun to break down. Sienna sat on the floor beside the work table. She had promised herself years ago that she would not cry over the quilt. That felt like a different person's rule now. She didn't cry. She sat for 11 minutes, she counted, and she looked at each square in the order she had stitched them. The rose-pink last. The door didn't open. Nobody came. After 11 minutes, she stood up and went to her bag and took out a black fine-tip marker and a small rectangle of cardstock. she used to label commission deliveries. She sat at the work table. She wrote one sentence in her cleanest handwriting, the handwriting she used when the words were supposed to stay. She read it back once. Then she picked up the quilt, carried it into the exhibition space, and put it on the display frame herself. The handwritten card was small enough that you had to step close to read it. Most people did. Some wounds don't erase history. They only reveal who tried to destroy it. Constance Reeves read it to herself first. Then she read it aloud, not performing it, just making sure that people near her heard. The words moved through the room the way things move, when they are true and everyone present already knows it. One woman set down her champagne glass. 2 people took photographs of the card, not the quilt. Sienna stood at the far end of the room near the entrance. She did not stand next to the quilt. She did not explain it to anyone. She let people approach it the way she had approached it herself for 7 years. 1 square at a time, at whatever distance they needed. The bidding opened at 2 o'clock. Auctioneer Garrett Foss opened the quilt's lot with a brief provenance. 7 years of construction, unique materials, bespoke technique. A damaged piece, he noted carefully, which had become, as the curatorial team assessed that morning, a document rather than a decorative object. Una Park submitted a bid through the event secretary. It came in on a small folded card, 3 digits carried across the room by hand. The auctioneer read it, acknowledged it, waited. Sienna watched the auctioneer. She watched his eyes move to the left side of the room. She watched them stop. Min Jae Han raised 1 finger. $250,000. Garrett Foss paused for 3 full seconds. He was a man who had never paused 3 seconds in a professional setting in his life. Someone in the back row said the number out loud, not as a question, just to hear what it sounded like in the air. Then Min Jae Han spoke, without being asked. The cream section. He didn't raise his voice. He was looking at the quilt. The cream section with the gold thread. That embroidery belonged to my wife. She donated the blouse by mistake, 9 years ago, to a Crown Heights charity drive. He stopped. Nobody spoke. Not the auctioneer, not Constance. Not Daniel Hahn, who was standing at the edge of the room with an expression Sienna had not seen on him before. The expression of someone realizing slowly what it is they have been about to do with their life. Una Park left the room at 2:14. The sound of her heels on the marble corridor was the only thing that moved for a moment. Through Constance Reeves, the following morning, Sienna received a message. Manj Han was not purchasing the quilt to own it. He was commissioning a project. The quilt's preservation, the stain intact, the damage documented, and its permanent installation at the Su Yin Han Textile Arts Foundation. The dedication would carry 2 names, his wife's and Sienna's mother's. He was offering her the position of creative director. Sienna read the message twice. She looked out the window. She said nothing for a long time. Then she wrote back 1 word, yes. 4 months later, on the opening night of the Foundation's inaugural exhibition, Sienna Nicole stood in front of the mounted quilt, framed behind glass, lit from above, the stain preserved and labeled as part of the work's documented history. And she was alone for 1 minute before the crowd came in. She put 1 hand flat against the glass, over the rose-pink square. The yellowed edge was still there, behind the conservation glass, exactly where she'd left it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever built something with your own hands, something that cost you years, and watched someone try to reduce it to nothing? Have you ever been seen, truly seen, by the last person you expected, someone who recognized your worth not out of kindness, but because they had carried their own loss? And when that moment came, did you take it? Or did you almost walk from what you deserved? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, memory, and redemption, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.